Hello and welcome to the fifth session of the Smart Local Energy Systems Unlocking Net Zero Conference. My name is Dara Bias. I am Head of Future Energy Services at Citizens Advice, the statutory watchdog for energy consumers. I'm going to be your chair for this session, which is called Local Energy Systems for Local Communities and Consumers, What Works? We're going to use the session to explore community-driven energy system change and how trial projects are working with consumers to provide cleaner, cheaper energy for all. We know decarbonisation of heat is going to require solutions that are locally specific, and there are benefits and challenges in trying to make this fair, accessible and inclusive across the country. The pandemic, I think, has had a real impact on everyone. And over the past year at Citizens Advice, we've helped more people than ever across all of our services. People come to us looking for help across a whole range of issues, from coronavirus to furlough, divorce to universal credit. For millions of people, their problems might only just be beginning as they continue to struggle with the knock-on effects of the pandemic. And this is at a time where we know, a lot of government support measures are going to be withdrawn in the autumn, including the end of furlough and the end of the £20 uplift to universal credit. Why am I talking about this? Because it's going to have a significant consequence in three main areas. We think we're going to see an increase in personal debt, an increase in housing and homelessness issues, and more people on inadequate incomes. And the reason I'm telling you about this is because it's the backdrop against which we're going to need to ramp up the ambition and to drive to meet net zero. It's really important that policymakers and service deliverers are mindful of just how much is going on in people's lives and homes when we're thinking about how to change behaviour or indeed make physical changes to homes. And, let's never forget energy is an essential service. So I'm really pleased that we have an excellent lineup of panellists for today's sessions. We're going to hear from Emma Bridge, who's Chief Exec of Community Energy England, Barbara Hammond, Chief Exec of Low Carbon Hub, Gareth Davies, Managing Director of Aquaterra, Adam Peacock, Postdoctoral Research Assistant at Keele University, Matt Lipson, Business Lead Consumer Insight at the Energy Systems Catapult, and Patrick Devine-Wright from the University of Exeter Energy Rep. I have been asked to rigidly enforce timing, so speakers, please do all forgive me in advance if I interrupt. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Emma.
Hi, thanks very much, Dara. So I'm just going to give a very quick overview and set the context really for what we're going to be discussing for the rest of the session. So we at Community Energy England represent over 270 member organisations from across the private, public and community sectors that are working really to put people at the heart of the energy system, primarily through supporting the development of a thriving community energy sector. And for me, it's fundamentally important for communities and people to be at the heart of a just transition in a decarbonised energy sector. Tackling climate change and moving towards a net zero future is a huge social as well as technological challenge. As you know, most of the changes up to now haven't had huge implications for day-to-day life, but those changes are now limited. And so societal and behavioural change will be a vital part of reaching net zero. Now, the exact amount depends on what route we will take, but it will involve changes to how we heat our homes, the way we travel, the way we work, and the way we live more generally. Public buy-in, cooperation and trust will be essential, but it must also be meaningful. We need to ensure diverse groups can participate and have their voices heard, that innovation takes into account how people live, and that it benefits everyone. We need both a bottom-up and a top-down approach. Essentially, we need private, public and community sectors all working together to develop new projects and to improve existing ones. We've seen that people will participate when communities are really involved in or leading projects. Now, there are always going to be a few early adopters, but not at the scale needed without the passion and leadership of local people. And community energy delivers effective, impactful projects whilst reinvesting their surplus back into the local community. They're trusted intermediaries, they're incredibly effective engagement, and have demonstrated significant perseverance and ingenuity despite facing numerous challenges. And the most significant and probably obvious challenge to the growth of community energy has been a lack of long-term stable policy. And I'll come on shortly to some of the policy solutions that we suggest. Other common challenges include a lack of organisational capacity and time, high levels of bureaucracy associated with many of the larger innovation and funding schemes, lack of development sites or assets, high grid costs, Now, that's often related to the inability for communities to just move their projects to where the grid has capacity. Or some projects do stall due to difficulties in partnerships, for instance, with developers or site owners. And due to those challenges, it's perhaps unsurprising that community energy has had its most challenging year yet last year, with installations in 2020 half of what they were in 2019. Yet despite this, community energy has continued to show increased social benefit, engagement and impact. And with the removal of subsidies and other financial support, there has been a shift in the sector away from focusing just on electricity generation projects, with organisations now focusing on a whole systems approach. So really including both their core priorities of tackling fuel poverty and demand reduction and exploring innovative business models on flexibility, low carbon transport and local supply. We'll hear next from our speakers some examples of how this is being done, but I just wanted to give a couple of other examples to demonstrate the type of projects being led by community enterprises right now. South and West Community Energy is one of the groups at the forefront of taking a whole systems approach to energy. They've installed or own nearly 12 megawatts of ground-mounted solar, 500 kilowatts of rooftop PV, and a modern water wheel. They're delivering domestic demand-side response pilot, installing EV charge points, heat pumps and hot water heating for shift demand. And they're also working to reduce energy demand by supporting energy audits, insulation measures, and energy efficiency assessments through their community fund, which I think has distributed around £220,000 since 2010. And in addition to this, their Solar Streets project was part of Western Power Distribution's Open LV programme, and their groundbreaking project made local electricity data openly available for the first time ever to both local communities and the wider energy industry, using local electricity substation data to explore the potential for DSR. Another leading example is Carbon Co-op, a community energy organisation based in Manchester, who developed Power Shaper, which is a community-owned energy aggregator service as part of the Open DSR programme. So this service again aims to support flexible use of the electricity network through domestic DSR, so more of the energy we can use can be supplied by renewables. But the difference is with Power Shaper, it's community-owned, so the service is local and trusted, which has proved to be valuable in engaging with adopters of low-carbon technologies, whilst also retaining more of the emerging value coming out of flexibility within the community energy sector. And these are just two examples of the breadth of community energy activity. With the right support, by 2030, community energy could deliver over 5 gigawatts, power over 2.2 million homes, save £150 million a year on consumer energy bills, and add £1.8 billion to the economy annually. And by working in partnership with the private and public sector and being a core part of local energy systems, this value would increase exponentially. Which leads me on to the final issue that I've been asked to cover: what policy changes are needed? You can find a lot more detail on these on our website, but they essentially fall under three banners. Firstly, establishing a fair playing field and enabling a route to market for community energy. So examples under this would include developing a target for community ownership of new energy assets, a long-term revenue source for community energy, such as through a community smart export guarantee, and introducing a meaningful commitment for all public bodies to buy community-owned energy. And if anyone is interested in looking more into PPAs and local authorities, Devon County Council last month published a report really looking into this and how to put a value on the additional benefit that community energy brings when purchasing electricity from them. The second theme for policy support is enabling community energy leadership in retrofit, demand management systems and driving behaviour change. We know energy efficiency won't happen without investment. We won't be able to decarbonise effectively without energy efficiency and demand management. And of course, to make that happen, we need that community engagement, we need that behaviour change. And lastly, and probably of most relevance to this conference, is recognising that community energy is smart and local by enabling community leadership in the development of smart local energy systems. This would be implementing a local electricity bill, resourcing and implementing a consistent process for local area energy planning, led by local authorities, but with a really clear remit for communities, and also resourcing community energy and public sector collaborations for the added value that they bring. Now, these are all very modest asks which would yield significant impact. I'm aware I'm coming to the end of my time and I'm very keen to hear from the other speakers, but I really do hope that that very quick overview ignites an interest and commitment for you to ensure that communities and people are embedded within your project And if any community energy organisations watching now, you're inspired to start exploring partnerships with private and public sector as a key partner in smart local energy systems. And I'll hand back now to Dara. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. I thought that was really interesting, and I'd encourage audience members to do drop in questions, because we are hoping to have quite a fruitful discussion after all of our speakers have had a chance to share their thoughts. And so let's move to Barbara Hammond, please.
Hi, thank you very much, Dara. I just wanted to begin with showing the top level slide of the project that I'm really going to be talking about here, which is Project LEO. LEO means Local Energy Oxfordshire. And picking up on the point that Emma was making about the importance of partnership to local solutions. This is one of the 3 UK smart energy demonstrator projects, and the Low Carbon Hub, as local community energy organisation, is in that consortium, led by our DNO, including both of our universities, including local authorities and other businesses. And we think it's a real win that we're in there, and we bring a different perspective, particularly on the social values that can be very easily missed by people who spend most of their life with technology or money. Next, please. So this is a slide that I really like from a European project called Flex Co-op, which really summarizes, encapsulates the change that we're trying to get in the energy system between what it looks like today, where the focus is all on big fossil and getting that transmitted over long distances to places. The future energy epicenter has to be much more about where we all live and work. That's where all the change is really going to happen. It's an enormous shift in the way that the energy system is going to be focused. And it's going to mean a lot of collaboration and a lot of participation by what I call real people rather than consumers in how that change is going to happen. Next, please. And I've tried to show on this slide what that means for me where I live, so that we can get some sense of the sort of concrete reality of this. So this is what the energy system looks like from Osney Island, where I live, just near the railway station in Oxford City. The image on the top left shows the transmission cables coming in. It's a bit of a romantic view of them, but that's what we see across our local park. Those come into the primary substation, which is just next door to our local primary school, and where those cables get buried under the ground. And they come to my local substation on Osney Island, which is that rather uninspiring brick box in the middle. And then the street that I show is a typical Osney Island street, small Victorian terraced cottages, both sides of the road, back at the end of pavement. And I think the challenge for us is how we are going to make changes to our energy system that puts EVs available to all of those houses, replacing all of those cars that are parked both sides of the road, which transitions all of those very tightly packed cottages to electric heat. And alongside all of that, makes an efficient energy system which allows those houses on Osney Island to take full benefit of the 48 kilowatt local little hydro scheme that we have that's connected to the same substation. That's the change that we need to have. It is located at that point where the distribution network meets our houses at our meter point administration numbers, MPANs. And it's a great big challenge, which is going to need to work, everyone working together in a very collaborative way. Next slide, please. And so the encapsulating the change that we need to make is it's a bit broad brush, but it's either we build loads more pylons and big wires and big switches and put lots of investment into building a much bigger system to be transporting energy all over the place. Or we make more room between the peaks that the system is currently designed for and the base load that it's currently designed for, so that we can use the existing infrastructure to its maximum efficiency, which must mean lower bills for everybody if we do that well, and which enables everybody to be trading not just their energy, but also their flexibility, so that we can really keep that base load as predictable and as straight line as possible, and get rid of those morning and evening peaks that we all know about, where we're using storage wisely and where it's good to be using, rather than expecting that everybody's going to have their own battery everywhere. And that we are sharing or trading alongside, and I didn't mention the most important one at the top, which is about reducing our use. So we're really bringing together now, for each household and each community, each business in the community, we're no longer talking about energy efficiency and renewable energy separately. We're talking about how everyone can bring those together to meet their needs as efficiently as possible, and then share and trade with everybody around them. Next slide, please. And so in Project Leo, one of the things that we're doing is working with 5 communities on what we've called smart and fair neighbourhood projects, where we can work out technical feasibility of these approaches, commercial viability of these approaches, and social desirability of these approaches, so that we're really stacking the value, not just financially, but also in terms of the place-based requirements that each community would have. And we're addressing not just the technical issues of how we accommodate EVs in a dense urban environment, or how we make the changes to heat pumps, but we're also, and how we deal with the varying voltage levels within the distribution level system, but how we're dealing with issues of different levels of affluence. So we're looking at the sort of urban-rural, what are the issues depending on where you live, but also what are the issues and how do you solve them depending on how much asset you have and how much disposable income, frankly, that you have. So we have those 2 axes there, and you can see from the titles how we're organising those into addressing specific issues that we can extract real, tangible, real life approaches to this, so that when everybody says to us, as they frequently do, how can I help? What can I do? We can say this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. We're going to next hear from Gareth Davies, who is Managing Director from Aquaterra, and we've had 2 speakers who've been absolutely on time, Gareth. So over to you.
Thanks, no pressure there then. Great pleasure to be speaking to you from the far north today, up in Orkney. And what I'd like to talk to you today about is a reflex project, which we're delivering at the present time, and then go on to consider some of the experiences, not just of this project, but maybe over the last 20 years as a community trying to achieve just transition, and reflecting on some of the measures that we may need to think about for wider rollout. So the first thing to consider is that our local energy systems need to change. Our experience in our community is that our present energy system isn't delivering what we need. It hasn't done for decades. We've tried to change it from the inside, we've tried to change it from the outside, and it's really been tough. So looking forward, with the extra pressure now of rapid decarbonisation, it's very clear that the status quo is not an option, and we need to change. And we believe that community stimulated change and community level change can be not just allied to the levels that were outlined in the targets spoken about earlier, but way beyond that. There's no reason why we can't actually use community-based systems for a much bigger part of our energy system. And that involves really undoing a lot of the rules and sacred cows that drive regulation and drive policy at the present time, and hopefully trying to get to a higher level where, you know, as somebody said earlier, energy is an essential part of our lives, but we need to respect it as that and give it the credibility that it needs. It's not just a commodity that needs to be delivered at the lowest price. It's got many other values that it gives us as society, and we need to take account of all of those. And it's that juxtaposition of perhaps a policy driver that's been in vogue for the last 20 years about minimum price, minimum price, minimum price, but thinking about energy as a total system that Reflex and Orkney's really been wrestling with. So our solution to that is to think about what is a local energy system, and to embrace, we take 3 pillars from that at the present time, which is the electricity, the transport, and trying to bring them together in a digitally connected system, which allows us to introduce flexibility and management and information to make that system more efficient and more appropriate for the that it's serving. Now, we haven't got generation in the mix at the moment under Reflex, and the reason for that is that Orkney's reached that panacea where in 2013 we'd installed enough renewable capacity that we're 100% provided for by renewables already, and we have been since 2013. So we don't have to solve the generation issue in Orkney, but we needed to look at all the rest of the systems. But obviously in different geographies, that needs to be done in different ways. So our energy system of the future is linking the renewable generation through associated flexibility to variable types of demand across the energy system. Sorry, I'm just having, oh, there we go. So when we think about an energy system, it's very easy to think about the technology. It's perhaps easy to think about the electrons or the molecules that are kind of feeding that technology. But one of the things that we've realized is that we've got the mindware, the people, you and me, that consume energy that we also have to deal with. And a lot of the time and effort in Reflex is trying to think about how we as customers and people within the community act at present, what our expectations are, what our aspirations are, and how those might be able to be changed to allow us to make the carbon transition that is so essential. So what we're doing in Reflex is marrying together the technological advancement with the ability of the customer to adapt to what's needed, and also then to work within a system which has a lot of inertia in it. It's not built for us to have that flexibility to change things. And as I come on at the end, I'll just reflect on some of that. So the way that we've thought about this is to create what we call the service circle. So within those 3 areas of power, transport, and heat, there's a number of sub-services, if you like, that are given to us or offered to us as customers. And any one person's situation or any one business's situation means that they'll access different parts of that service circle. And likewise, Reflex doesn't have to go and replace or deliver all of those services, because there's a plethora of energy services in our community already. So what we're looking to do is to understand what's there and then provide the right linkages to enable better provision of those services and on a pathway to decarbonisation across that energy circle. And that means that in some areas, Reflex may take the plunge and deliver a service directly and take full responsibility. In other areas, we might work with other existing local partners and seek to partner with them for them to allow them to continue to offer their service, but to integrate it into that overall scheme, which provides the management and the flexibility to make it as effective and efficient as possible. So that's really what we've been seeking to do. And one of the reasons that Orkney was chosen for this was that we're at a scale of community that change can happen in a manageable way. We can test and explore things. We have about 10,000 households, a population of 22,000 people. We've got about 1,000 businesses. And when you look at the economics of change, Orkney's at a scale where you can try things out and achieve things at a level which makes it affordable, essentially. Alongside that was the fact that Orkney has been at the forefront of many innovations in the energy space over the last 20 years. Those were big reasons why Orkney was chosen going forward. And what we've seen is the uptake has been excellent. So we have over 600 members of Reflex now. We've distributed or are distributing over 100 electric vehicles. These are the test drive vehicles that local people can come up and try before they buy. We're getting a 50% conversion rate from drive to order on those vehicles. We're also getting really good uptake on solar battery solutions, heating solutions, all of the different parts of the energy system. So that's going really well. So having got to that stage where we've thought about what we need to launch and launch something, our next question is, how can we replicate that and share that with other people? And one of the things that we're charged with within Reflex is thinking about replication. So when we go and we think about other communities, the first thing we need to recognize is that each and every community has its own unique, distinctive characteristics. So here's some pictures that represent urban and rural communities throughout the British Isles. And each one of these communities has a number of factors associated with it that differentiate it from every other community. And one of the frustrations that we find is that in policy world, a lot of the policies that come out talk about average communities. If we're lucky, there might be 10 average communities across the British Isles. Very often there's just one average household or average business that's used as an exemplar. And the problem is that the UK is an incredibly diverse landmass and set of islands in terms of energy use and the conditions that dictate the amount of energy and the types of energy that people need. And we haven't really addressed that yet within our energy system. So one of our challenges, I think, as a country is, first of all, understanding what is our suite of energy communities that exist across the whole of the British Isles. And I chose this map because this is one of the very rare energy maps that shows Shetland and Orkney on the end of the British Isles. So even to appreciate the nature of the country that we live in is really difficult for policy and analysis to do, because very often they miss out parts of our energy system. And once we've understood the scope of that, we then need to think about what is the appropriate level to organize things and think about the different characteristics that exist, for example, in the middle of a city or in the outlying rural areas or on island situations. Each of these have very different characteristics associated with them. And those characteristics feed not just into electricity, and so often we leap to think about electrons, but we have to think about the molecules, because that's the big job that we want to do. How are we going to decarbonize the fuel that we're using for transport and heating? And we have to get that on the agenda alongside electricity.
Gareth, I'm going to ask you to start wrapping up, please, if you can.
Yeah, thank you. So my conclusion is that what are the solutions that we need for this? So we've thought about this in Orkney, and so often people go and ask for money, but actually what we don't need is money. What we need are three things. We need recognition. We need recognition, first of all, that communities are there to help solve a problem we have. We have a huge problem. The status quo isn't good enough, and communities are a pathway to fix this. It's not only going to be solved through a corporate route. We also then need a mandate to empower change. So we need to be given the tools and the flexibility to, at a community level, to affect change. Now that needs some brave decision making, but frankly, we need brave decision making to tackle the challenges we've got. And that's probably going to involve flexibility. I think all of us on all the projects that are happening are bumping up against the national systems that are built for the old world, not for the new world. So we need to break down those systems and create the freedom and flexibility for us to go forward. And it is an absolute crisis, and we need to believe and imagine and think and plan and do and achieve all of these things that people didn't believe was possible, because, as I said, the status quo is not an option. Thank you.
Thanks, Gareth. Thanks so much. We're going to move swiftly on to Adam from Keele University. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you very much. And I have control of slides. Excellent. Okay, so I'm Adam Peacock, postdoctoral research associate at Keele University, and I lead on the user-centric design work package within the Zero Carbon Rugeley project. My colleague has already presented here, so I'm not going to spend masses of time explaining, the sort of scope of Zero Carbon Rugeley, but we are part of the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme. We're one of 10 future design projects. We started the project March 2020. It's certainly been interesting to engage with communities during a pandemic, to say the least. And a lot of interesting lessons have been learned through that, which I'm going to share with you today. But we're trying to design a smart local energy system for the town of Rugeley and sort of the surrounding areas, and trying to produce innovative, replicable and sort of scalable energy solutions, but also a design process so that this can be replicated elsewhere. Energy lead on the project, I myself from Keele University, diverse array of sort of stakeholders, and we even have a theatre involved to just kind of really hit home how diverse it is. So in terms of user-centric design, I really like this quote, and it rings, I think, very true to a lot of the conversations we've had so far. The earlier we get people involved in design process, the easier it is, and I firmly believe that. And so from the start of our project, we've had a distinctive emphasis, an entire work package focusing on community engagement and embedding the community into the design. So a couple of key questions that we had, can we get the community interested in engaging in the design of the smart local energy system? Can we increase their understandings? There's obviously a huge knowledge gap that we need to think about. Can we make sure that it actually meets the needs of the community? I don't see the point of designing something if it doesn't actually work for the community, and so having their input is really important. And just begin to catalyse what we've been calling a SLES-ready community, which is getting people to understand the implications of this in their lives, how their lives would change within a smart local energy system. So we've kind of done this whole, we've got 2 design cycles here. This is sort of a working model. And one thing that we really did was take a step back and try to understand the community we're going into. It's been really nice to see this idea of mindware. I think that's really cool. And to really sit back and say, well, what do the community think? What is the context that we're going into this with? And so what we've done is really taken our time trying to build up sort of a detailed understanding of the community we have, their wants, their needs, the challenges, the opportunities, and then using that as a basis through which to design the smart local energy system. And I won't dwell too much on this, but this shows sort of the extent of the analysis. Appreciate you can't read it because I've had to zoom it out so far, that we've been doing, and using sort of a variety of methods. That then gets baked into sort of an action list for user-centric design. I think there are about 40 odd different points that we got from just a broader exploratory phase. And not only does that reinforce the design of the smart local energy system, the consortium respond to it and we make sure we feed it back to the community, but it also reinforces our user-centric design approach. What worked? What engagement was appreciated? When did we post something on social media and when did people respond to it the most? Is what we're doing interesting? And so that's kind of a very quick review of our process. In terms of what works, and I thought I'd just sort of share some of our sort of understanding that we've developed. We've really gone for sort of a multi-tiered approach to engagement here. And so we have different sort of users and community stakeholders involved. So we have sort of community stakeholders who tend to be sort of from local authorities or have sort of a high degree of decision-making power, and they really help guide us on the project Local Opportunity. One of the most central things that we've done is develop community gatekeepers, and these are people who have significant influence. They're local community leaders. They have a good eye to what's going on, to opportunities that we can use for engagement. We have about 19 of them that sit on an advisory group that we meet with regularly, where I update them on the project, they update me with what's going on locally, and through that we're able to sort of really develop a trusted relationship. One of the things I'm most proud of with this project is we've developed voluntary community ambassadors. So these are local people within the community. And whenever we design something, be it engagement material or we try to write a storyboard for a business model, we can hand it over to them and they critique it from that community lens. And so we're making sure the community are helping to shape our engagement approach. And then we also have our sort of end users. These are the people that would be involved in the SLES. There's a variety of them, a significant diversity of them. And so I think that's been really effective in sort of facilitating community buy-in and building sort of reinforcing what's going on. Secondly, I think different opportunities for engagement. Now, as I said at the start, the pandemic has certainly been an interesting time to be doing a lot of this. So we've been using online methods so far. Social media, we kind of had a larger page where we can put information out and people can comment on it, and a discussion forum, which is a bit more intense. And that is continually building every day. And that's a really sort of selective form of engagement. You're not sort of forcing this down anyone's throat. They can jump in, jump off at any time. And I think that's been really effective. We've also been running a lot of workshops, which I'll talk about in a second. And that's a sort of 2.5 hour, 2 hour, sometimes hour intensive form of engagement that people can take part in. And we learn an incredible amount. And then we've also interviewed the local gatekeepers and stakeholders so that we can kind of contextualize what we get from the community and just sort of try and tease out any biases or anything like that. You've been using a pretty novel technique, cultural animation, developed by the theatre that we work with, New Vic Borderlines and Keele University. On the left-hand side, you can see that we basically put a map up of the local area and got them to use Zoom Annotate tool and doodle all over it. And then I went back and used GIS to kind of produce a community-facing map. And this was just of local transport issues. And we've done this for a whole variety of things. The workshops are quite creative, they're quite participatory, and they make energy interesting. They make the entire thing interesting. And I think that's key to really selling this. Not everyone is necessarily wanting to jump in and spend their Saturday mornings talking about energy. But if you can present it in a creative, participatory, fun way, that gets round. And I think that's why we've seen it sort of an increase in engagement. We've had people writing poems, acting out business models, sort of playing games, drawing on maps, you know, and I think that's been really, really effective. But I really liked this mapping technique. And what's been so great to see with all of this is this focus on the local, this whole idea about context. And we've really worked hard on that, making this as place-based as possible. So we firstly focused on what's important to the community, what is the context that we're trying to design this smart local energy system in. Our first question, our first workshop was called Who is Rugeley? And we invite people just to tell us about their local area, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities. We've also focused extensively on local heritage. Now, for those of you familiar with Rugeley, it had the giant power station, which has since been demolished. But that local heritage, and it turns out that throughout time, Rugeley is a really exciting relationship with energy. And so we've really tied into that and tried to make this as place-based and as focused as possible. So I would say overall, there's no quick fix, but I think it's definitely best to start early in terms of community engagement and embedding user-centric design. There needs to be a diversity and sort of a variety of interesting ways for people to engage, and really to focus on that idea of co-production. And in terms of next steps, we're now looking to sort of more traditional solutions-driven forms of user-centric design. So the consortium now have an idea of what this smart local energy system will look like. And now we'll go back and say, okay, we listened to you. This is what we've come up with. How does that work? And we'll carry on co-producing that together. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Adam. That's great, really interesting. And we're going to move on. We're going to have Matt from the Energy Systems Catapult. Thanks, Matt. I'm hoping we're going to have Matt. Right, okay. I think what we'll do is we'll go on to Patrick Devine Wright from the University of Exeter, the Energy Rev programme, and hopefully we'll get Matt back and we can catch him up after.
Thanks, Dara. And I'm glad I don't have to give Matt slides as well. That could have been quite tricky for me, but anyway. Okay. Let me just see if I can, yeah, there we go. Can you see the slides then? Great. Okay. Well, thanks for the invitation to talk here. And I'm going to be talking about local energy systems with communities and users in mind. And to give you a brief introduction to myself, I guess I'm mainly here because of my involvement in what's called Energy Rev. And that is a large research project with about 20 different UK universities looking into smart local energy systems from a range of disciplinary backgrounds, from engineering on the one side to social science contributions. And that's really where I come from as well, in terms of looking at things from a geography and a psychology point of view. And we've already heard quite a lot of interesting ideas from today's panel about how the social aspects of local energy really matter, and how thinking about issues like place, community, belonging, identity, engagement, all of those are absolutely crucial to the transformation we're talking about in terms of not just net zero, but local net zero, making it local, making it real. And I'm involved personally in a range of different initiatives at different scales. For example, the IPCC as a lead author on mitigation. I'm chair of the Devon Net Zero Task Force and working this weekend on a climate assembly that's taking place there, as well as being involved in initiatives like Exeter Community Energy, which is a local group that's been helping people to own and be involved in solar PV and other kinds of renewable generation over the past 10 years. So in terms of key messages for today, I've got 3, I think, that I'm trying to pass on. And these all stem from the research that I'm doing with my colleagues on the Energy Rev project. Firstly, and this is good news, I think, for everybody in the panel today, is that there is a strong public appetite for a more local energy system than we've had to date, particularly across the 20th century, and a very centralized system with big electricity pylons, as Barbara showed there. So there's a lot of appetite for that. And I think there is a great opportunity at the moment to capitalize on that appetite. It might not be there forever. And it's not going to be easy because personal knowledge and involvement in these kind of innovative technology schemes like we've been hearing about today is quite low. So there's a big appetite, but a very low direct experience. And that's something that means that smart local energy systems is still a fairly nebulous idea. It's an abstract idea for most people. So we have an opportunity to fill that gap. It also means that these early stage case studies, and we've been hearing about LEO, and we've been hearing about Reflex and hearing about Rougeley today, they are critically important because they will set the tone. When people think about what a smart local energy system actually means in concrete terms, these early demonstrators are going to be setting the tone. So they have to work in a sense, and it's great to hear success stories already emanating from them. The second thing I wanted to point out is about benefits. And what people want is a more localized energy system that also has tangible local benefit. It isn't enough to talk about system change or a new UK energy system or replication elsewhere or upscaling. It has to reach local people and to benefit local people in a tangible way. And that balance, that tension between rolling out innovative change in a way that makes sense for local areas and places, but also makes sense from a national system, even an international system point of view, is something that I think policy really needs to keep their eyes focused on in terms of managing this transformation we're talking about. The third thing I'll mention very briefly is that we see actually a huge variety and diversity of engagement across the PFER-funded design and demo projects that we've been looking at as case studies. They're not all doing the same thing, and maybe there isn't a one size best fits all anyway in engagement. But what we found is that when COVID hits, when disruption happens to these projects and delays occur, different things happen in terms of responsiveness. And I think that's something to be careful about in thinking about what works. It isn't just about doing more, but it's about thinking sensitively and carefully to what makes most sense and what kind of ethos and values are based around engagement in different communities. So I'll just flesh those out in a little bit more detail over the next few slides. All this slide is really showing you is that we need evidence. We need an evidence base, we need data, we need robust evidence in order to support a lot of the assumptions that people have around smart local energy systems. We need to hear it from the users themselves in terms of what's it like to experience some of these propositions and offerings around electric vehicles, storage, etc. We need to make sure we collect their points of view in a robust way and then bring that evidence to bear and consider it carefully. So that's what we're trying to do in the Energy Rev project. And I'm just going to flesh out those two stories, one about national public perceptions and secondly about how engagement is actually taking place across the design projects. So this is some research findings really emerging. The data was only collected relatively recently, but this is what I'm saying in terms of this strong public appetite. If you ask members of the public, do you want to keep a more distant energy system with really big pieces of kit and distant power stations, very few people have an appetite for that. Only 10% of this sample of 3,000 adults said they wanted to preserve a system of that kind, whereas virtually half said they wanted a much more locally based system, and some people are extremely keen on that. If you ask people, where do you want their electricity to come from? Again, there's a huge emphasis and appetite for a much more locally distributed system in that. And we have a tailing off of public support the further the distance goes to regional and national level ways of connecting that up. So if we were to design our electricity system for the future, not only around environmental imperatives like climate change, but also just giving people what they would actually like and putting society first and thinking about what sort of system we should put in place, then a more localized energy system seems to make sense, at least from this point of view. And then in thinking about benefits, this is just to underscore that these have to have tangible benefits for local people. That's what a local energy system has to look like. It has to have beneficial outcomes. That's not to say that all of the benefits must stay in the local area. And so a third of our sample wanted an even balance of benefits being distributed both elsewhere and in the local area. But only 9% regarded it appropriate for local energy systems to have benefits that would go elsewhere and flow elsewhere. And if we think about some of the energy system changes we've had recently with, say, large wind farms, it's been a continuous struggle to do large-scale energy infrastructure in a way that makes sense for local communities. And that's why we've had pushback. So getting this right, if we have smart local energy systems in terms of tangible local benefits, is incredibly important. And then just to say finally something about what we're seeing in our case studies across the PFER program. So at different stages, we've looked in depth at certain demonstrators like Reflex, as we've heard today, and Leo, that we've heard today from Barbara and Gareth. But we're also looking right across the piece, and there are lots of design projects as well, and they're all doing different things in different ways in different parts of the country. So what we're seeing is that each of them is kind of defining and understanding engagement in slightly different ways. And these range from the kind of really interesting creative community theatre that we heard about from Adam in terms of the Zero Carbon Rugeley project, to other approaches that are more about financial investment or just about social marketing and reaching people through social media. Now, COVID has disrupted projects, undoubtedly, just as it's disrupted society entirely, and it's delayed engagement in many cases. But the problem we see is that in some cases, it's led to a kind of a social media approach where the emphasis is simply upon communication rather than participation and two-way engagement with local people. And that is something that might need to be reconsidered if we really want to put communities and users at the heart of this transformative change. And finally, I would just say that I think in terms of looking at PFER and looking across these design and demo projects, the emerging evidence suggests that much more could be done in order to enable social learning across these experimental projects. We can see that some of them have really got very innovative and in-depth ideas about how to do transformative engagement. But how do we make sure that the projects we've heard about today, like Leo and Zero Carbon Rugeley and Reflex, how do we make sure that those kind of accounts for engagement reach all of the other innovative experimental products or projects that are taking place in this place? And I think if that's the case, we need to think systemically about creating an ecosystem where they can communicate with each other and make these things common practice, not just best practice or exceptional practices. So that's it for me. These are some of the initial outputs written for academics from the Energy Rev project, but I'd be interested in any comments or inquiries or questions that you might have if you'd like more detail. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That's great, really interesting. Something about the way people feel so positively towards local delivery is definitely needs unpacking more. And I think we're going to go back to Matt's slides, and Matt is with us. And after that, we are going to launch into some Q&A. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks very much, Dara, and for bearing with my poor broadband, which died in the heat. So good afternoon, everyone. I work at a Catapult, which is a not-for-profit kind of set up to encourage and speed up innovation in this sector. We work with a ton of different people and communities and businesses around the country to kind of use innovation to drive the change more quickly. And I run the people part of the catapult, which uses the kinds of techniques Adam was talking about there, and Patrick was talking about, to kind of understand what people actually need and want, challenges they're facing, and design solutions that we then test in the real world. And I've been working on, our team's delivered about 50 projects in the last year, and I've been lucky enough to visit Orkney and see the amazing work that's going on up there, and actually lived, worked and walked recently in Oxford and past Osney. So I'm familiar with lots of the other things. And I guess what I was going to talk to you about today was some of the findings we're seeing. I'd start with saying that actually on the next slide, there is overwhelming support for net zero amongst the public. Most people saying, they kind of want to get on with it, basically, and that something really needs to be done and should happen, change needs to happen quickly. The next slide shows that the problem is that on the next slide, people don't really have a clear idea about what that actually means. So when you talk to people, they often talk about recycling, they talk about using less single-use plastic, and they have kind of maybe not quite a detailed picture of what's actually required to get to net zero. If you explain in the next slide what is actually involved via citizens' assemblies and that kind of thing, people, say that they desperately do want to play their part, and that they believe that local areas should be setting out a plan that they can sign up to. Localism is incredibly popular with people. And I was lucky enough to participate in the UK Citizens' Assembly with Dara, in fact, and lots of other very talented people, and just engage with those 100 members of the public that were kind of representative of the UK. And it was fascinating to hear their perspectives on how to get this done. The next slide, please, shows that people, they really like the idea of smarter, more local energy, especially if that means cheaper, greener energy from someone that they can trust. We've run a ton of surveys on the topic and done lots of research with different sorts of people, using our home truths panel of thousands of people. And on the right, there are a couple of links to some recent reports we've done. But at a high level, I guess, just to sort of summarize, what we see is that people love those benefits, like cheaper, greener. What's not to like, especially if it's local and from somebody that they can trust. But people do find that the jargon that we describe various concepts with is pretty hard to understand. So we're going to have to find a way to explain concepts like peer-to-peer, demand-side response, energy as a service, or vehicle to grid, where your electric vehicle is providing electricity to provide to the grid when there isn't enough wind or solar on stream, and perhaps use it locally to provide electricity to people nearby. And when you do explain those things, many people are pretty supportive, again, of the aim. But if they think that the cheap green energy also means that they might not get the experiences that they want, they're far less supportive. After all, no one is interested in things like vehicle to grid or V to G if it means they can't get from A to B. So people want to know that the energy they need to get comfortable, to stop their food from perishing, and all those sorts of things, that it will be available when they need it, so they can get the experience they want. And if they can't get that, then they're a bit less comfortable with giving up control and letting somebody else choose when their energy is available, when electricity is available or not, whoever's doing that, whether that's a community business or a privately owned business. In other words, they want to know what they're going to get, not just what it costs and how it is delivered. And we shouldn't probably be too surprised by that. After all, on the next slide, every previous major energy transition has really been driven by benefits, not reductions in cost or appeals to the environment or appeals to kind of community. Actually, if you think about it, transport got faster and cleaner, going from horse to car. Heating got safer and easier, going from coal fires to gas central heating. Both of those changes were expensive, required quite a lot of infrastructure to be built and changed. And I guess, if we want to make sure that smart local energy is kind of widespread and works, we've got to make sure it's as good as, or ideally better than, what we already have in some ways. And there's huge potential for that, for kind of, as you've heard from many speakers, for kind of giving communities more involvement and more back in kind of benefits from the energy system. So how do we deliver excellent energy experiences? The next slide shows a page from a report we just produced, which is a review of best practice in lots of other sectors. And we used that review to develop 6 metrics across 6 different steps. And in a nutshell, if I was to summarize it, it has to just work really well for people in their situation, whatever that is. So how do we do that? How do we go from assemblies with 100 people to delivering change with millions? So on the next slide, you can see that there's no single path to net zero. So how are we going to know which one to take? I guess if you're trying to do something difficult, it's going to help to have a plan. Ideally, a plan that people prefer based on accurate data about those people, when they plan to renovate their homes, when they plan to replace their boilers, buy electric vehicles, borrow electric vehicles. So you have good information. And that's why on the next slide, we created a thing called Zero Carbon Vote, which is kind of like an online voting platform to learn how people in a particular area would prefer to get to net zero. So you can use it to get feedback on a local net zero plan, if you have one, or to build support to get to net zero if you don't have a plan. You can find clusters of enthusiasts to work with, so you have somewhere to begin rolling out retrofits, heat pumps, and so on. You can find out who plans to buy an electric vehicle so you can put public charging in the right places. You can find opponents, not everybody will be supportive. You can find them and figure out how to help persuade them and bring them on the journey. Why are they put off? What is it that they want? This data can give businesses a lot of, and community groups, a lot of good information on the future kind of potential, the size of markets in different areas, so they can build cases to invest in a particular place. And many people are going to be involved with delivering this green kind of revolution. So that same data will attract employers so they can grow jobs in a particular area. Now, we're pretty excited about the potential of this tool. We've been using it already with 10 pioneering councils, and it'll be part of the community engagement capability that the Catapult is building in our toolkit. As of today, it's only optimized for mobile phones, so it looks a bit shonky on a desktop, but I'm told by the development team that that'll be fixed in the next week or 2. So just to close on the next slide, I guess I'd say that if we're going to build thriving low carbon local communities, we're going to need an energy system that delivers experiences everybody can enjoy. And I'm just looking forward to discussing how we can work together with everybody else to make that happen. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Matt, and I am very glad that your internet helped out there. So we are now going to move into a Q&A. We've had some excellent questions in already, and do please keep posting them. We're going to kick off, first of all, I am going to ask, oops, that's me with my timer for Matt there. Apologies. So the first question I'm going to ask Barbara, Emma and Adam for their reflections on this one. And we'll start with Barbara. And the question is, how will a local energy system engage citizens who have no interest in trading their flexibility? Not those who don't care about the environment, but people who are just too busy to think about demand shaping. And I guess it's a great first question. And it's sort of, when I opened this session, I talked about, you know, just how busy people's lives are. And that this isn't the thing that most people spend a lot of their time thinking about, apart from us. So yeah, if we can, Barbara, first, could you give us your thoughts on that one? Forgive me, Barbara, you're muted.
Yeah, thanks, Dara. Yeah, I think that question also really is pertinent to those people who have very little to trade. So tenants, maybe, people who are in fuel poverty and various other sorts of deprivation. And I think it's fair and realistic to say that probably most people won't take an active part. But what we need is an energy system where you have choice about that. And so I think there will be ways that people can sort of give their flexibility or their energy to an aggregator of whatever sort. And the question is, what are the rules around that? We want to think about what that means for people before we get problems, so that we don't have a Twitter situation happening. And we've given people, there's transparency and choice about it, and that we're very clear what the choices are about how your data is used, what data you own, how it's used, and what control you have over that, and how you can get it back. And I think that the way that we've organised our metering system in the UK is really inimical to that approach. It is a dog's breakfast, as we all know, and we really need a better organisation of ownership and meters and ownership of the data that they generate.
Thank you, Barbara. Emma, can I bring you in on this one?
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree with everything that Barbara said. I think it fundamentally goes back to making sure the local energy systems are just and they are fair and they are easy to do. I think transparency, as Barbara said, is absolutely key, and there's some really interesting stuff happening around data at the moment. But I think it's also about kind of making sure that we don't penalise those who don't want to get involved or who aren't able to get involved. So that's kind of really where that technological and social innovation comes in. So if we design the technology to work around people's lives, it takes very, very little for them to get involved in that and move kind of in the direction we need to go. And I think that again is where that community energy organisation involvement really comes in, is that trusted intermediary and knowing where to go for information, because it is a lot of the time it's time, people are busy, but it's also just not knowing where to start and who to trust with this sort of thing. So yeah, it's having that trusted person to really speak to about this as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And Adam, your experience in Rugeley, what do you think about getting people who might not necessarily have this at the forefront of their minds?
I mean, for me, I totally agree with everything that's been said. And I think one of the benefits we've seen about bringing the community in right at the start of the project and taking them on the journey with us is that it has done exactly what Emma just said. It's about building a trusted relationship. We have a community energy group involved with what we're doing, and it's having that sort of public face to it. And I would also add that I think that as you take people on that journey, they might initially think that they're not interested in it, but are they necessarily equipped with the knowledge that they need to be able to make that decision? And I would say that a lot of this is still not well translated. There's still a lot that we need to do in terms of people understanding the implications of all of this in their own lives. And so as you start to do that with a community, people suddenly can become interested. So I think it's quite easy to kind of think, they don't have an interest, but that's at one point, and people's perceptions of things evolve over time. And that's certainly something that we've learned throughout our project.
Thanks, Adam. I am going to move on and ask a question to both Gareth and Patrick, and it's going to be one that I think has probably come up before and will come up again. But the difference between different places. How do you think we can actually share lessons between rural, urban, island? How do you best share those lessons, and how do you find both the commonalities, but also how do you explore those differences in order to really tailor responses to local areas? I'll ask Gareth to kick off, please. You're on mute, Gareth.
It's okay. Yeah, I think this actually links back to the last question as well. For me, is that the climate challenge that we face is, to my understanding, the biggest challenge that we have. It's bigger than COVID. And so I think we need to kind of maybe think a bit differently about this. And I think we've got a lot of lessons we can learn from COVID. We started off in that emergency with a very nationalized approach. And as we kind of went through it, we found out that local solutions might have worked better and helped people. And what you do in the middle of a city might be different to what you do in the middle of an island. But there are also common threads where mask wearing and things like that are ubiquitous and useful. And the reason I use the COVID example is that I think that we lull ourselves into a false sense of security if we believe that this transition is going to be affected by people's choices. I don't think we have the time and the luxury to do it. And that doesn't mean that this is almost enshrining community at the heart of it. To go to Matt's point about the motivation of people, people are up for this change. we need guidance and leadership. Now, whether that comes at a national level or a community level, I think is important. So I think at a community level, you can provide leadership on energy at a local level, but you have to really go beyond incentivizing people and create that momentum of movement towards change. And I think that a lot of those tools that we're going to use are ubiquitous, but they need to reflect the distinctiveness of every community. So it's a difficult balance to strike. You have to take the things that are useful and apply them, but not go with dogma into a situation and use something that's inappropriate. And there are current parts of the system that are inappropriate for one part of our society, even though they might work in other parts of our society. So it's not that we're starting off in a good place. We've got some pretty unequal things that we're enacting at the present time.
Thanks, Gareth. And Patrick, based on the research that you've been involved in.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. And I guess I would start by saying that, the premise that whatever's happening in the Orkney Islands can't be transposed somewhere else, there's some truth in that, but I think that there's a danger that we just keep being too technocentric in our perspective on this. The technical solution in an urban part of London is, of course, going to be completely different from something that happens in the countryside in Oxfordshire or something that happens on an island off the Scottish mainland. So the technology will be different, but that's not the same as assuming that all the other things that go to make an effective smart local energy system project work are not actually very similar. We've already heard here today that if you talk to people about vehicle to grid, peer-to-peer, flexibility, you're not going to get very far because they are jargon terms that people are not going to relate to very easily. So if we can tackle the issues around communication and understanding, or about participation and engagement, if we can tackle those issues, I believe that they're far better, far more easily replicable across diverse places than maybe we might assume. So yes, places are unique and distinct, and we need to make sure that local energy projects fit the places that they are supposed to be happening in. But just because the technologies that work in particular places are different doesn't mean that lots of other things are actually going to be very similar, because bringing communities with us is something that needs to happen everywhere, not just in one place or another.
Thank you. I think that leads really nicely into another question that we've had, which I'm going to pose to you, Matt, which is with the removal of FIT, small-scale solar farms are less financially viable, even if they're popular with locals. Large-scale solar farms are much less popular with locals. How to address this? It's almost a continuation of the last question, isn't it? Like, how do you, in some areas, it would be better to have a large-scale farm, but people might not want it, the appetite might not be there. In your experience and the research that you've been involved in, what do you think is the best way to overcome these sorts of quite big questions?
Yeah, okay. Finance is obviously a key issue. I think it's quite clear from all of the sort of system modelling that's been done. We do quite a lot of system modelling of the whole energy system in the UK, that it's cheaper to get to net zero overall if you can be a bit flexible about when energy is being used. And obviously, we all use energy at home, at work, and so there's massive potential there. At the moment, the price signals don't reward perhaps all of the kind of right behaviours, if you like, or at least the low carbon behaviours. The government is kind of aware of that. They've actually launched a consultation on this topic yesterday, and it's pretty clear to me that the existing subsidy arrangement, like the FITs, were rolled out a while ago, really, and the existing way of kind of paying to get to net zero isn't really fit for purpose. The government's kind of fully aware of that as well. So I think you'll see a lot of change. For me, I think the price is obviously an important component, but it's not the only component. People don't just buy a kind of a price label when they buy something. There's also a thing, the other side of it. People will use their time or their money or their energy to get something back. And I think we need to pay at least as much attention to how we can work together in communities and businesses and as individuals to give people good experiences. And so the subsidy arrangement, the financial arrangements will change dramatically, but those core end uses, people want to use energy for getting around, getting comfortable in their homes, caring for other people to make them feel comfortable when they visit their homes, those sorts of things, cooking. They're not going to change actually dramatically. So what we should, one way of getting through this kind of complexity is to think a bit more clearly about how do we use electricity when it's available and other energy sources to give people the things they want when they want them. And I think that way of thinking could really help.
Thanks, Matt. I agree with you. We've had a couple of questions in about ownership and smart local energy systems, and I think Matt's touched on that in terms of how much things cost and where does the ownership sit. Would anyone like to comment on that? Barbara, have you come across that with the Leo work?
I think you can, ownership comes up a lot, and people are really motivated by being able to own DERs and also potentially to own the network infrastructure itself. My view on that is that that's sort of fine, but actually you can get over-committed to that as an idea. And what we actually need is whoever owns the infrastructure, and I'd love it to be owned by communities, but I'm not going to die in a ditch over that. Whoever owns it, we need to have statutory access in an open and transparent and real-time way to all of the data that's generated by that. And I was shocked to my socks when we started on Leo to find how little knowledge the DNOs have about the grid edge, i.e. from the secondary substation into your home. They do everything by models that, they work in a centralized system, but they are not going to work in a very decentralized one with loads of EVs and electric heat and goodness knows what going on. And it's really important for people to be able to get involved with the local authorities or communities or whomever in planning their local energy system by being able to see what their infrastructure is like, what the headroom is between peak and normal, i.e. what capacity there is to allocate. So for me, transparent ability to allocate grid capacity in the cheapest possible way is more important than who owns it. If that's clear to anyone?
Thanks, Barbara. That is clear. Yes, it is. Adam, do you have a similar experience or reflection from the work you've done in Rugeley?
Yeah, I think there's a strong social justice component to this that is potentially more important to people, and certainly what we see. So it's how you sell it in terms of empowerment, and I think that's what people are more interested in than necessarily. I mean, obviously there are an array of sort of financial considerations that people are interested in, naturally, with energy, but I think it's really about, one of the common threads throughout all of these talks today has been local, and thinking locally. And something that Gareth really emphasised in his talk is the need to think about local context. And I think if you can tie it into that sort of social justice at the local level, then I think that's going to be quite powerful.
Thank you. We've had a question in from the audience, which is, do you think the potential of a carbon trading framework at the community consumer level might be a benefit or incentivize and accelerate the move to low carbon environment and climate change? Would any of the panelists like to put their hand up to have a go at this? I'm wondering if you, Matt, have come across any of these sorts of topics. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Apologies, none of the controls of anything are working for me instantly. I can't mute, I can't do anything. My keyboard doesn't work. So doubtless my voice will die any second. Anyway, personal carbon trading is something I spoke to as the person who introduced it as a concept when I was working at DEC. And I used to speak to the economists in DEC. So personal carbon trading sounds like it might be related to this concept, which is this concept that everybody gets a personal carbon budget. And then, you can, if you use less, then you can sell your spare to somebody else. And if they need a bit more, they can they can buy your allowance. And the economists at the time were saying, yeah, great idea. It's a brilliant idea because it does reward people who use less carbon financially, and it accepts that some people are going to need a bit more. And also it allows you to kind of gradually reduce the allowance to zero, or whatever level you need to get to. So it's actually a really elegant, from an economics perspective, very elegant way of getting to where you need to go. So what it does is it does help individuals or communities understand, like, what is it that they're doing that's releasing carbon. So and also gives them that kind of immediacy of if they do make a change, getting a reward for it potentially. The problem at the time that I was told is just the kind of cost of actually creating a system like that, and enabling it to work. I suspect the costs have probably changed a bit since over 10 years ago when I asked the question. But I think it is administratively quite difficult. And Barbara's going to save me. Thank you, Barbara. Go ahead.
Thanks, Matt. I think there's a really serious social justice issue in here. I think anything, and I've got these worries about Project Leo and trading capacity and energy as well. Anything that is based on trading something is going to reward the people who've caused the problem and not allow benefit and potentially even disbenefit those who haven't caused the problem. And I think that's a really big issue that we're going to need to address. And a little bit like discussions on basic income, I think the only way that sort of thing can really work is if we have a sense of what a fair and just usage is that is protected for everyone, so that we don't get people tempted to trade their personal carbon allowance in a way that they might be tempted to trade a kidney or a set of teeth or whatever it might be. So I do think that there are some real problems, but I do think it would be good for us all to think about what a fair and just, usage of all of this should be.
Thank you, Barbara. I think, Gareth, you wanted to come in on that too.
Just to add another dimension to it, is beyond the personal carbon trading. I think valuing carbon within the energy system is incredibly important, because at the moment it isn't, and the decision making that we get is therefore, leaning us towards maintaining the status quo. So I think that whilst I totally support what Barbara said in terms of the challenges of the just transition at an individual level, I think there needs to be a kind of just part to the cost of carbon in the system at the moment, and we're just not seeing that. So, low prices supported by carbon full energy are not really in the best interest of anybody.
Okay, thank you, Gareth. I think we've got time for one more question. There's been a question from Richard, which is, how do the panel think we could ramp up the speed of change for decarbonising our lives, given the growing urgency for action, while still keeping people on board? It's a big question, but I suspect it's one that you've all given some thought to. And I'm going to ask everybody to briefly respond to that one, please. And if it's okay, I'm going to start with you, Emma.
Gosh, yeah, I have spent a lot of time on this and haven't really come up with any solutions particularly. I think some of it is what Gareth was saying about that mandate for decarbonisation, so embedding that across all government departments and Ofgem and other regulators. I think that's absolutely core, because then if it needs that supportive policy regulatory framework in order to embed into people's lives and to make it easier for people as well. And I think some of it is around the information that's coming out. So I think all the themes that have been coming out today really answer this question. So it's kind of explaining things in a way that people understand, making it easy and simple and transparent for people. Yeah, I think that I'm probably quite interested actually more in terms of the practitioner level, what sort of experiences they're going to come out with in answer to this question.
Yeah, fair point. Patrick.
Thanks, Tara. Yeah, this is an absolutely $6 million question. And if we knew the answer, we'd be doing pretty well. But I think you could respond to this question in so many different ways, but I think what I'm going to start with is actually something that Gareth echoed in his presentation. I don't think that at the moment the declarations of climate emergency and environmental emergency really, there's real credibility and leadership at the national level in the UK. I think that if you look at the outcome of G7 recently, climate change was just not there enough. I think it's not enough to declare an emergency. You have to act as if your house really is on fire. And I don't think many people would really say that the current leadership in the UK is acting as if the house is on fire. And I think until our leaders take it on board seriously enough, credibly and tangibly, I think the issue of whether we can get people on board is actually a bit of a smokescreen. It's a diversion. The fact is, if our leadership take it on board and make it clear that we're in an emergency and think about bringing everybody with them on that journey, then I think we have a much stronger basis to progress.
Thank you, Patrick. Gareth?
Yeah, just to take up the revolutionary cudgels then, I think taking it one stage beyond what Patrick said there is that, yeah, it's not the citizens of this country that are the problem. It's the system that we're trying to break down to enable us to change. Everything we've introduced in Reflex has been adopted as fast as we can roll it out by the people that we're working with. So the public are not the limiting factor at all. Now, granted, Orkney's been a few years down the chain of people being aware of the energy crisis and some of the solutions, so it was a good place to start. But all of the delays are in the system, they're not in the customers. And so, and in fact, all the obstacles to offering the customers what they need, again, it's not customer expectations, it's around the flexibility and the freedom that we have to operate. So I feel that, you know, and I come back to COVID, I know how my life's changed, I know how all of our lives have changed. You know, we're not the problem. It's having the flexibility, the mandate, and the recognition that there's a problem that needs to be solved, and we have to kind of knock down the walls to get that, I think.
Thank you, Gareth. Barbara?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very similar tune, and I just think the evidence for that requirement is the way that particularly home energy retrofitting has stalled since the policy framework was taken away in 2015. And the debacle, frankly, that we saw around the green energy grants, whatever they were called, that really erodes trust, not just for householders, but for the supply chain. And it actually put people out of business. You just can't have that if you're serious about climate change. And we need that policy framework within which people can then operate. And I just couldn't agree with Gareth more that it's not the people who are the blocker here. They are ready, they're willing, they're gagging for it. We're starting to get people being quite angry about wanting to make a change to EV, but not having the infrastructure available to support them, and getting cross with us that we're doing a pilot.
Yeah.
We should be rolling this stuff out like there's no tomorrow.
Thanks, Barbara. Matt and Adam, I'm conscious that you don't want to repeat what other people have said, but I do want you to give you a chance to have a final say. So we'll go to you first, Matt, either in response to the question or anything you feel you haven't had a chance to say, or something that hasn't perhaps come up.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo lots of things other people have said. I guess for me, the problem with saying your house is on fire is if you don't have an escape plan. And I think I would question, from what I've seen in some areas, the quality of our ability at scale, 30 million homes, to deliver zero carbon homes. I don't believe we have a supply chain for that just yet. So I would do two things, I guess. One is that I would invest in the pioneers, so that you've heard from some pioneers today. The stuff that's going on in Reflex and in Orkney and Rugeley, this is really cutting edge, and that stuff should be, you know, scaled up as quickly as you can possibly grow your organizations. And I'm sure you know plenty of people that would get on board. So scale that up and listen to the experiences of people at that cutting edge to figure out how to redefine the system and the rules and regs, because they don't work. They're not rewarding the right behaviours at the moment. And so they need to change. But our mechanism for changing them is actually quite poor and slow and outdated. So that's where we need innovation in the way we decide how to govern ourselves. So that's my view. And it's going to take a while for great stuff, great experiences that will bring everybody on board to evolve. The other thing I think is that those planning decisions I alluded to around which networks in which places. So that's why I think zero carbon vote is an interesting idea. I just wanted to answer someone. Dave asked a question about the detail of how it works. Dave, it's a prototype, the one you're looking at. If you looked at it online, the intent is that people can put a postcode in, and we're using this in 10 areas of the country where we have a plan for their area, and then it can give them a bespoke cost of different ways of getting to zero for their home. So you can start to discover which ones people prefer. And I think those are the sorts of things we need to do to empower communities, local areas to actually come up with a plan and then start delivering it and learn from them how to scale that.
Great. Adam, thank you for words.
Yeah, I've been smiling throughout this, and I'm not sure I could be any more democratic about my answer. Particularly echo a lot of what Patrick said. I think the only area where I might slightly disagree is the idea of people being ready. I still see in our engagement a lot of misinformation out there, a lack of sense of urgency, and people still contesting why we're even doing a lot of this. And I think that's fundamentally down to where this information is stored, about converting things to lay language, about making things accessible. It's something I'm very conscious of in the sort of user-centric design work that we do. So I still personally think that there is a substantial gap that we need to address there in terms of bringing people with us and getting them to understand why this is so important. But yeah, I echo everything that Panel said.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, great. So that brings our session to an end. I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as I have. I've learned a lot. I've taken lots of notes, and I'm going to be doing lots of Googling after this. So thank you ever so much. That wraps up the day as well for the conference. And then tomorrow morning at 10 a.m, we've got the final session, which is making smart local energy systems a reality. What next? With a whole host of very interesting people, including Laura Callanan, Laura Sands, Eric Brown, Matthew Bolton, Rebecca Ford, Cheryl Hayes, Lawrence Slade, and me. And I will be doing my best to try and summarise this huge session. I think we've covered a lot, and it's been really interesting. So thank you very much for all of your brilliant questions. And thank you to the panellists.